Hello everyone and welcome to the University of Law podcast and to the first episode in our Diversity Matters series. My name is Patrick Johnson and I'm Director of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the University of Law, and today I'm delighted to be joined by the President of the Law Society, Lubna Shuja, in celebration of International Women's Day. Lubna is the 178th President of the Law Society, the first Asian, the first Muslim and only the 7th female President. And I'll be talking to her about her career to date, what it's like to be a woman in law, and also the changes to the industry she's seen during her career. So Lubna, it's a real pleasure to have you here with us today.
Thank you for inviting me to be part of this podcast. It's great to be back.
Wonderful. Thank you. And perhaps I can just kick off. So we're talking about International Women's Day. So the theme of this year's International Women's Day is about embrace equity. So what do you think the legal sector can do to embrace equity?
So I think the first thing that we really need to do is to understand what the difference is between equity and equality. Equity is about understanding that each person has different circumstances. So not everybody is coming from the same place. Not everybody's journey has been the same to get to where they are. And it's about allocating resources and opportunities so that we create an equal group of people. We want an equal outcome. We want people to have an equal outcome, but some people, they're not starting at the same level as other people. So equity is around, recognizing that more focus is needed on particular people to get them to that stage where the opportunities are equal. Equality, on the other hand, means it's really important. But if we're just using the concept of equality, you can get into a situation where individuals or a group of individuals won't see their specific needs being met. They won't see their needs being recognised. And if you're giving the same resource to everybody, no matter what their circumstance or background, they're not necessarily all equal. One of the things that we encourage people to do when they're looking at how they can do things, focusing on equity, look at groups that have the largest barriers when it comes to entering the profession, and focus on them. Look at how you can open up the profession to those people who might not necessarily have those opportunities. People who don't know anybody in the law, people who are from disadvantaged backgrounds, people who have socioeconomic problems, they don't have those same networks that might help them to understand how they can get into law, what law is all about. So it's having a focus on them. That's one of the things that we can do. When it comes to being within the work environment, we encourage firms to look at allocating work on a fairer basis. So, making sure that for example, there may be clients that only want to deal with a particular type of solicitor. They might, it's making sure that whatever your background, you have equal opportunity to the same work that everybody has, because, that's where we then start talking about promotion prospects. If you're not getting the same access to work opportunities, then that's going to impact on your promotion prospects. So it's about looking at that as well. That's
really interesting, I think, in terms of that difference between, and really helpful, I think, to clarify that difference between equality and equity. And you mentioned in that looking at people who may not have access to particular networks, people who may not know enough about law. I suppose I'm interested from your own experience, sort of entering the law, and how that came about, because you've said in the past, in terms of you've come from a sort of working class background who may not have known about the law and accessing that. So in terms of that equity side, could you tell us a bit about how you sort of journeyed into a career in the law?
Of course. You're absolutely right. I am from a working class background, originally from Bradford. My parents were not professionals, and I didn't know any lawyers. I didn't actually know a great deal about law, quite frankly. Back then we didn't have a lot of kind of legal dramas on television or anything like that. So I wasn't exposed to anything to do with the law. And I actually thought the law wasn't really for somebody, for somebody like me from my background. I'm Asian, I'm working class, I'm female. I always saw or thought law was a profession for, your typical white middle class background. You just think, well, that's not going to be accessible to me. I didn't know any lawyers. Knew very little. And actually, when I was at school, I was never encouraged to do law by my teachers. It wasn't really something they ever talked to me about. So I got into it because, and actually, I'll tell you this because it goes back to role models, which is another thing I'll talk about a bit later on. I didn't know any lawyers, so I didn't have any role models that were lawyers. And I actually had a couple of cousins who were journalists at the BBC. And they used to tell me about, their job and, they were making documentaries and it was all very, very exciting and all sounded very glamorous. And I thought, that I could do that. And this is coming back to role models. I saw them doing it. I talked to them about it and I thought, I could go into that. That sounds really interesting. So I actually got a place to do English at university. And then when my A-level grades came out, I did better than my teachers had predicted in my A-levels. And it was at that point that a really good friend said to me, you could do law with those grades. You want to try and get yourself onto a law degree. You could still go into journalism afterwards, but it will give you a lot of options. Why don't you do that? So I actually got onto a law degree through clearing. I decided, okay, let's have a go. And got myself onto a law degree through clearing. And as soon as I started to learn about law and about cases and legislation and how it applies to our everyday lives and how it provides a framework for how we live, I was hooked. That was it. I was, right, this is really interesting. I think I could do this. So that's how my kind of journey started. Got myself onto a law degree. But getting articles, as they were back then, training contract it's called now, so challenging. And I know it's still challenging even now because so many people contact me, students contact me, trying to get a training contract, can't get a training contract. Have you got any advice? What can I do? What can I do? And it was just as difficult way back then. And back then, we used to apply by filling out, you had to prepare a CV and handwrite a cover letter to go with your CV. And I must have sent 100 of those, over 100 of those, before I got an interview. Half of them didn't even reply. I mean, I say half of them, I probably got about 20 rejection letters. The rest of them didn't even bother to reply to me. But I got one interview. And that one interview turned into an offer. They were called Fladgate Fielder back then, now called Fladgates, and they offered me a training contract. And that's where I got my foot in the door. It was fantastic. I should say, while I was doing my law degree, I was very fortunate to get, I managed to get work experience with a local firm in Bradford. So I managed to get some exposure there to what it was actually like to work in a law firm. And what was involved on a practical level, but I didn't get that until obviously I'd started my law degree. But when students contact me now and say, I can't get a training contract, what can I do? What can I do? What I say to them, and this is something I didn't know when I was looking for a training contract, I never knew that you could go and work in-house. I didn't know you could go and work for your local council or local government, or I didn't know they had legal departments. I didn't know that they had roles for solicitors within their organisations. I always thought you got to get a job in a law firm, and that's how that's what you do. So now I say to students, don't just restrict yourself to applying to law firms. Look at in-house roles. Nearly every organisation of a large size, so retail, bank, insurance, telecoms, they all have legal departments, and they all have in-house legal teams. So I say to students, if you want to get work experience, apply to them as well. Go to your local council. You can actually get fantastic work experience with your local council because they do such a huge range of work. They cover all sorts of things: housing, planning, family law, all sorts of things, landlord, tenant. You get really good experience working in your local council. So that's worth applying for. And, the other thing, if you're really struggling to get an opportunity to experience what it's like to be a lawyer, go and sit in your local court. They're open to the public. Just go and sit in and watch a few hearings and see what happens. You'll see how the lawyers, what do they do? What's the procedure? What's the process? You pick up tips just from doing that. And these are things that nobody ever told me when I was doing it. So I'm really keen to share that and say to students, don't just narrow yourself to that path, because there are other options and opportunities. Now 25% of the solicitor profession works in-house. It's, really, really growing. And I deal with a lot of admission ceremonies where we admit newly qualified solicitors. And so many of them are going straight to in-house now. And it's probably partly to do with work-life balance, partly to do with where their interest lies. And, there are more opportunities out there than I think people realise.
That's great advice and some really good tips there, I think, for students to consider. And there are a couple of things that you mentioned there. One around the number of times you applied, and so something about that perseverance in terms of keep trying and not giving up is really important. You've also talked about, something that I talk a lot about is about you cannot be what you cannot see. So that role model and how important role models are.
But do you know what, Patrick? I'm now the president of the Law Society of England and Wales. I am what I could not see.
Exactly. And that was exactly my point.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
It is possible.
Yeah, absolutely.
It is possible. Yeah.
Absolutely. And you are now a role model. And I think we talked about you being the sort of first Asian, first Muslim woman going into being the president. It'd be quite interesting, I think, for people to hear about what does the role actually involve. To begin with, in terms of, it sounds very grand, president of the Law Society. So it'd be good to get an insight into that, but also in terms of how you see yourself in terms of as a role model as well, and what you do in terms of encouraging other women into the profession.
So being president of the Law Society of England and Wales is, the Law Society represents over 200,000 solicitors across England and Wales. So our job is to make their lives easier, quite frankly. We are there to represent them, to promote them, to support them, but also we have a really important role in upholding the rule of law, in making sure that our justice system is fit for purpose, and campaigning on that. We campaign a lot about access to justice for whoever, whatever their background, whatever their means. So there's a big remit with the role, and it involves not only dealing with members, but also dealing with the government, dealing with other stakeholders, dealing with the media. So it's a very busy role. It's only for 1 year, so it's a short time to try and achieve everything that you want to achieve, but it's very, very rewarding. And it's an honour. It's an absolute honour to be able to do it, quite frankly. Really, real honour to be able to do it. For me, I have a number of priorities that are part of my presidential plan that I'm working on. I really want to bring the whole concept of justice to the top of the agenda. I want the public to be able to understand why justice is so important. I want them to understand why and how it relates to them on a day-to-day basis, because quite often members of the public don't really understand why it's important for them to be able to have access to a solicitor until they need one. And it's only when they're in trouble or they've got some transaction that they'll go and see a solicitor, and then they'll realise what value that solicitor brings. So I really want to, bring that home and get them to understand why it's important that we have a good functioning justice system that's open to everybody in this country. We've been doing a lot of work recently on criminal legal aid, because we have a lot of criminal legal aid lawyers who are leaving the profession because they just don't get paid enough money. They just can't afford to do the work anymore. So that's one of the areas that we've been working and trying to persuade the government to try and put more money into criminal legal aid and into civil legal aid. There's a lot of court backlogs at the moment, so we're doing work on trying to bring those down and making suggestions for how that can be achieved. I'm also, obviously, being the first the first Muslim, the first Asian, and the 7th woman to become president of the Law Society. Diversity is really, really important to me. So I'm doing a lot of work around diversity. We know that the figures and statistics for those from Black, Asian, and minority ethnic background coming into the profession is increasing, but they're not getting to the senior levels. We know that for women solicitors, 52% of our profession is now female, which is fantastic. We're tipping the balance. But again, they're not getting to the senior levels of the profession in the same proportions, and they're not getting to the senior levels of the judiciary in the same proportions. So a lot of work to be done in that area. I'm also working on ethics is a topic that's quite close to my heart. I have a background in professional regulation and disciplinary work, and I really want to, and I am getting a conversation going within the profession about why ethics are so important, and not just why they're important, but to talk about some of the ethical issues that are facing solicitors that are not necessarily covered in black and white in the code of conduct and in the regulations that solicitors have to follow. So a huge amount of work to be done. And we also have, I forgot to mention, a very, very prominent international profile. So the Law Society of England and Wales is renowned all over the world for being, our jurisdiction is a global jurisdiction and very, very highly regarded around the world. Many other countries turn to us to see how we do things, and they try to emulate, they want to emulate those. We are known for upholding the rule of law. We are known for speaking out when lawyers are at risk internationally. And we have a global reputation for doing that. So I'm carrying on doing that work. I work with a number of international law societies, international bars, international governments, to progress that work and take it further forward.
I don't know how you fit all that.
Neither do I.
And sort of 1 year to make a difference. It's not a great deal of time, and obviously you need to prioritise and you need to look. And you've covered quite a number of things there. In terms of your legacy, and at the end of that year, is there one or two sort of key things for you that you think, actually, when I look back, I know that I've done a good job, or I know that I've, done what I've set out to achieve?
Patrick, I've got a presidential plan, and I want to deliver on everything in that plan. So you'll say to me, what's your one or two? I won't be happy with one or two. I need to be able to tick all of them and say, you know what? I did that, I did that, I did that, and I did that. That's what I want to do at the end of my year. So it's really difficult when people say to me, what are the one or two things you want to achieve? If I only achieve one or two things, I'll see that as you failed, which is not good, actually, because actually whatever you achieve, you should be proud of doing it. But I want to achieve everything that I've set out, and I'm determined to do that. So I've got it's a heavy program and it's an ambitious program, but I'm determined to deliver on it, and I will deliver on it.
I'm sure you will. That's great. And it'd be good to maybe talk to you at the end and to sort of reflect on some of that.
Yeah.
One of the things that you mentioned, as we're talking about sort of celebrating International Women's Day, is that tip in the balance in terms of 52% females entering into the profession. And I suppose thinking back to when you started, was it, 30 years ago?
It was exactly 30 years ago, yeah.
So the difference, and I suppose that the progress that's been made, and whether there's more that needs to be done within the legal profession, because I know family is very important, and how does someone reconcile that with sometimes a very challenging working within the sort of legal profession?
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, when I came into the profession, there weren't that many women in the profession, and certainly not women who were Asian within the profession. And, back then, and I like to, share the story with you, because it's when I look back, I think that was just ridiculous, really. But when I came into the profession, the first kind of job that I did as a qualified solicitor, the firm had a rule that women couldn't wear trousers. And this is only 30 years ago, which is like, what? Really? Honestly? But back then, it wasn't unusual that if you went to court, women, they didn't wear trousers in court. It just wasn't the done thing. Women would wear skirts. And, I was a Muslim woman. So for me, and I was working in an Asian community. So for me, I had to go out there and try and find long skirt suits. And when I'm talking about long skirt suits, I'm talking about down to the ankle, because anything, above that, probably it wasn't really acceptable. So that was a challenge, but I did push back on it, and I managed to persuade the firm that I was working with eventually over a number of years that, look, you need to change this policy. Let's move with the times here, and it's discriminating actually against women, against me as a practicing Muslim. So little things needed tweaking. But now, as I say, 52% of the profession is female, which is fantastic. And I think, you were asking about what are some of the issues, and I know women particularly have a challenging time. They're often more likely to have caring responsibilities. They're more likely to have family, children, which does make it more challenging for them. It shouldn't do, but it does. And I think one of the really positive things that came out of the pandemic and all the kind of, working from home, it's now far more acceptable to be able to schedule your work around your family commitments. If you're working from home, you can work the hours that as long as you're doing the work. I mean, that's the key thing. As long as you're getting the work done, it doesn't matter whether you're doing it, 9 to 5 or whatever time it might be in the evening that you want to do it. But it means that you can fit that around your other commitments in your life, your family, your children, your caring responsibilities. So that's been a good progression. But I think, there needs to be a recognition that we need to maintain that going forward. It needs to be the norm, and we need senior partners and senior, legal counsel within in-house, whatever the business whether it's a firm or as a business, they need to recognise that quite often, and it doesn't just apply to women. One of the things we saw in the pandemic was actually men were having the advantage of being able to spend more time with their families, spend more time with their children. It should apply to everybody. It should be the norm that, you can have a family life. You can be a solicitor and you can have a family life. Traditionally, that's been quite challenging. If long hours was very much associated, and still is to some extent, with being a solicitor. And if you say to people, what's the worst thing about your job? Long hours will always be up there in the top 3, if not the top number 1. And we need to change that, and we need to make it more acceptable that you can have a work-life balance and still have a successful career.
Absolutely. And in terms of that successful career that you've had, and in terms of owning your own practice as well, we all need help and support. You mentioned someone talking to you about going into and thinking about a career in law. Who, I suppose, reflecting back on those 30 years, who's been your biggest supporter or advocate, would you say, during your career?
I get asked this question a lot, so I have given it a lot of thought. And honestly, I have had so many allies throughout the course of my career. I couldn't pick and choose anyone because they've all been important and they've all played a role. Wherever I have been, there's always been somebody there who has seen potential in me before I've seen it in myself. There's always been somebody there who has pushed me along, pushed me a bit further than I was comfortable going, suggested a direction to me that I perhaps might not have thought about, but said, you know what, you should think about doing that because you'd be quite good at that. And that's one of the things I think are really important in your career, having allies. They are the ones who will be your voice in the spaces where you don't have a voice, in those spaces where, you don't even know conversations are taking place. But they are those allies who have access to those conversations. They can use their position, their privilege, their power to be your voice and to be your advocate in those spaces. And I've been so lucky to have a number of those all through my career. And I'm really grateful to all of them. I think often they underestimate what an important role they have in other people's career progression. And that's really, really, and it's important to acknowledge that, because they are as much a part of the journey as what you've done yourself. I mean, I've worked really, really hard. I've always tried to do my best, whatever I'm doing. I've been determined. You got to have hard work. You got to have determination, but you do need a little bit of good luck along the way as well. And I think I've been very, very fortunate to have had that luck in the people that I've worked with, the allies that I've had, and, you know, the opportunities that have presented themselves, often as a result of those allies that have helped me along the way.
That's really interesting, that the importance of allies and that support. And as you say, for a lot of people, it's not just one person. There's a whole range of people. And I'm thinking about in terms of International Women's Day, and thinking about International Women's Day is not just about women. It's also about men and their role and what they can play. So just reflecting, I suppose, thinking about how important are men's role within this space as well.
Phenomenally important. I've already said that women are not getting to the senior levels of the profession and the judiciary in the levels that they are, you know, within the profession. You know, we know, I think the statistic for the very, very large law firms is about 35% of partners are female, only about a third, which isn't kind of reflecting. But I know that a lot of the large law firms are taking steps to address that. So hopefully with time, we will see that figure change. But, you know, the senior levels generally tend to be men. They are generally the decision makers. They are generally the ones that can bring about change. So it's important, they have as much a role in all of this as women do, because they are in that space that women can't always have access to. And they're the ones that can speak and say, well, hang on a minute, you know, what about that woman or that female? You know, we should be considering her for this opportunity or this role or this whatever. Men are incredibly important, and actually, you know, it should be, that journey is something both of them should enjoy. And I know many, you know, I've had many male allies who have taken great pride in seeing what they've done for me and where I've gone on to because of, you know, perhaps doors they've opened for me or conversations they've had, or, you know, they've just pushed me in a direction that it'll have started with a conversation where they've said, have you thought about doing this? And I'll say, no, I couldn't do that. There's no way. And of course you could. Yes, you could. And that puts that seed in your head. And that little seed is then, okay, well, if they think I can do it, maybe I can do it. And then it snowballs from there. So absolutely, men, absolutely important. They are very important allies and just as much a part of the conversation.
In terms of then thinking about the legal profession and progress and change that you've seen over the last sort of 30 years, so have you got any, I suppose, advice, twofold really? One, in terms of to law firms, in terms of embracing equity, but also, I suppose, advice to women looking at entering a career in the law as well.
So let me start with the women entering a career in law for a start. I mean, I think one of the things that I say to people, and I didn't necessarily do this when I came into the profession because I was a bit embarrassed about my background. I didn't want to stand out. I just wanted to fit in. You know, I didn't want to be I didn't want people kind of looking at me as if I was different, because I felt different. I didn't feel like necessarily that was my space. But I now say to people, embrace your uniqueness because it brings something to the table. You know, be yourself because you don't realize how important that is. Your background, your diverse experience, your whatever you've gone through in your life, you will have something that you can contribute to the conversation. And actually, coming back to, you know, law firms and businesses, people want to do business with people that look like them. They want to see themselves reflected in your organisation. So, you know, if you haven't got enough women, if you haven't got enough Black, Asian, minority, it applies across the board. They're not going to relate to your organisation. So there's a real imperative. So going back to, I would say be yourself, be your authentic self, and bring yourself to work, because that has value and it will add value to the organisation that you're in. What other piece of advice can I give to people? A lot of women, and I think I've probably done it during the course of my career, will often think, oh, I'm not ready for that yet. So I would say, don't wait until you think you're ready, because you're never going to be ready. If an opportunity comes along, take it. Just take it, because you don't know where that's going to lead you. I often talk to students who will say to me, oh, I'm struggling, can't get, it's coming back to the, can't get a training contract, And I say to them, networking is really important. And don't think when you meet somebody, that person, I'm wasting my time talking to this person, because actually you don't know where that person might take you. You don't know what other conversation might come out from you speaking to that person. You don't know who they know. You don't know what they might be able to do. And actually, every interaction that you have, think of it as a potential interview. Whatever interaction you're having, think of it as an interview. Because it doesn't matter who you're talking to, they may be able to help you along your journey in some way. And if they can't, they might know somebody who can. So that's another piece of advice that I give people, that don't take every opportunity that comes, network, and don't think, oh well, you're not a senior partner in a law firm, I'm not going to waste time talking to you. Because actually, you don't have to just talk to senior partners in law firms to be able to get an opportunity. They can come from other directions. We have lots of resources on the Law Society website that law firms and businesses can use. We have the diversity framework. It's like a toolkit on our website, which sets out steps that firms can be taking and businesses can be taking if they want to look at how they can improve equity and equality, equity within their organisations. So I'd really recommend they have a look at that. In relation to students, one of the things that I just want to highlight that they might find useful to know is that for the last 10 years, the Law Society has run a scheme called the Diversity Access Scheme. And what that does is every year we provide funding for exceptional students who have a really strong ambition to qualify as a solicitor, but who come from disadvantaged or socioeconomic, their background is less privileged. And we give funding for them it helps them with some of their study fees. We can provide them with mentors. So that's a really, it's worth looking at that and applying to do that if you think that might be of assistance. And there are actually a number of schemes out there and scholarships that you can apply for, details of which we do have on our website. So it's worth having a look at the Law Society website. We also have a social mobility ambassadors programme. And what we do there is get role models, because we've talked about role models already and how important they are. We have a number of role models that come from disadvantaged backgrounds, and they talk about their journey, how they got to where they have, and they're available to speak to students and to give them advice. So that's another thing, and their details are on our website as well.
Really good advice. Thank you so much. It's been a real pleasure having you talk to us at the University of Law podcast and really kicking off our sort of Diversity Matters series. So thank you so much for your time, Lubna Shuja. It's been great. If you want to find out more about equality, diversity and inclusion at the University of Law, please visit our website or check out our socials. Thank you.
Thank you very much.